In the sultry heat of a Colombian night, under the watchful gaze of a waning moon, a man stepped out of the shadows. Pablo Escobar, the notorious drug lord, had just made his grand exit from the luxurious prison he'd built for himself. The Catedral, as it was known, stood as a testament to his power and defiance, a fortress of concrete and steel nestled in the Andes, now left empty, its echoing halls silent but for the whispering winds. The year was 1992, and Escobar's empire was crumbling. The Colombian government, tired of his blatant disregard for the law, had finally decided to move him to a more secure facility. But Escobar, the self-proclaimed king of cocaine, had other plans. He had spent millions to ensure that La Catedral was his personal paradise, complete with a nightclub, a jacuzzi, and even a private zoo. It was here that he had hosted lavish parties, entertained high-ranking officials, and dictated the fate of his vast criminal empire. But now, it was time to leave. Escobar walked away from La Catedral, his footsteps echoing on the cold stone path, his heart heavy with the weight of his past. He had come a long way from the humble beginnings of a street thief in Medellín. He had built an empire that spanned continents, amassed a fortune that numbered in the billions, and struck fear into the hearts of governments and law enforcement agencies worldwide. But now, he was a fugitive, a man on the run, his once invincible empire shattered. The night was dark, the air thick with the scent of impending rain. Escobar's men, loyal to the end, had prepared a getaway route, a network of tunnels that snaked through the mountains, leading to a safe house where he could regroup and plan his next move. As he walked, Escobar's mind raced, a whirlwind of memories and regrets, plans and schemes. He had always known that this day would come, that the Colombian government would eventually catch up to him. But he had also known that he would never go down without a fight. As he reached the entrance to the tunnels, Escobar paused, his hand resting on the cold metal of the door. He took one last look back at La Catedral, its light still burning bright, a beacon of his former glory. Then, with a heavy sigh, he stepped into the darkness, the door closing behind him with a final, echoing click. The tunnels were damp and dark, the air thick with the scent of earth and decay. Escobar moved slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silence, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He was not a man used to fear, but he felt it now, a cold, gnawing dread that clutched at his heart. He knew that he was not just running from the Colombian government, but from the ghosts of his past, the lives he had taken, the families he had destroyed. As he walked, Escobar's mind drifted back to the beginning, to the streets of Medellín, to the boy he had once been. He remembered the first time he had seen the power of cocaine, the way it had transformed him, given him a purpose, a reason to exist. He remembered the first time he had ordered a hit, the first time he had seen a man die at his command. He remembered the women he had loved and lost, the children he had fathered, the lives he had ruined. But he also remembered the power, the invincibility he had felt as he had built his empire, the respect he had commanded, the fear he had inspired. He remembered the thrill of the chase, the adrenaline rush of outwitting his enemies, the satisfaction of a job well done. He remembered the money, the power, the glory. And he knew that he could never give it up, not without a fight. As Escobar emerged from the tunnels, he found himself in a small, nondescript house, a safe haven where he could regroup and plan his next move. He was greeted by his most trusted lieutenants, men who had stood by him through thick and thin, men who were willing to die for him. They listened intently as he outlined his plan, his voice steady and sure, the fear he had felt in the tunnels replaced by a cold, calculating determination. But even as he spoke, Escobar knew that this was not the end. This was not the final chapter in the story of Pablo Escobar. No, this was just the beginning of a new one, a story of a man on the run, a man fighting to reclaim his empire, a man determined to write his own destiny. And as he looked into the eyes of his men, he saw the same determination reflected back at him. They were with him, to the end. And so, Pablo Escobar, the most wanted man in the world, disappeared into the night, his legend growing with each passing moment, his story far from over. The hunt was on, the game was afoot, and the world was watching, waiting, wondering what would happen next. But for now, the king of cocaine was gone, vanished into the shadows, his fate unknown, his legend immortal. As Escobar's safe house became a hive of activity, plans were laid, alliances forged, and old scores settled. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the hum of urgent whispers. Escobar, now clean-shaven and dressed in the simple clothes of a working man, watched from the shadows as his men prepared for the storm he knew was coming. The first blow fell sooner than expected. A team of DEA agents, tipped off by an informant, raided a safe house in Medellín, seizing a cache of weapons and arresting several of Escobar's men. The news reached Escobar like a punch to the gut. He knew the informant had to be close, someone he trusted, someone he considered a brother. The betrayal stung, but it also hardened his resolve. He would find the traitor, and he would make an example of them. Meanwhile, the Colombian government, emboldened by the raid, stepped up their pursuit. Roadblocks sprang up like mushrooms after rain, and helicopters buzzed overhead like angry wasps. Escobar's men, scattered across the city, were forced to lie low, their movements restricted, their communications compromised. The net was tightening, and Escobar could feel the noose around his neck. But Escobar was not a man to go down without a fight. He counterattacked, striking at the heart of the government's power. He ordered a series of bombings, targeting police stations, government buildings, and even a civilian airplane. The explosions rocked Medellín, sending shockwaves through the city and the country. The message was clear: Pablo Escobar was still a force to be reckoned with. Yet, even as he struck back, Escobar knew that he was fighting a losing battle. The government was too powerful, too well-armed, too determined to bring him to justice. He needed to change the game, to take the fight to a new level. And so, he decided to do the unthinkable: he would surrender. But this was no ordinary surrender. Escobar had no intention of spending the rest of his life behind bars. No, this was a ruse, a way to buy time, to regroup, to strike back when the government least expected it. He would go into hiding, biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to re-emerge, stronger than ever. The day of his surrender arrived, a blustery January morning in 1992. Escobar, dressed in the drab grey of a prison uniform, was led from the safe house, his hands cuffed behind his back. He walked with his head held high, his eyes scanning the crowd that had gathered to see him, to jeer him, to spit at him. He saw fear in their eyes, respect, awe. He saw the power he still held, the legend he had become. As he was led into the back of a waiting van, Escobar turned to his captors, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You think this is the end," he said, his voice low, steady. "But it's not. It's just the beginning." Then, with a nod to his men, he stepped into the van, the door slamming shut behind him, leaving the world to wonder what he meant, what he planned, what he was capable of. The van pulled away, disappearing into the morning traffic, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a chorus of jeers. But as it did, a lone figure emerged from the crowd, a man with a familiar face, a face that had once been a friend, a brother. He watched the van until it was out of sight, then turned and walked away, his heart heavy with the weight of his betrayal. Back at the safe house, Escobar's men watched the news reports, their faces etched with worry, their guns never far from their hands. They knew that their leader was playing a dangerous game, a game that could cost them everything. But they also knew that Pablo Escobar was a master at the game of survival, a man who had cheated death more times than they could count. As the days turned into weeks, Escobar settled into his new life behind bars. He was housed in a luxury prison he had built himself, a palace of concrete and steel, a testament to his power and influence. He had everything he could possibly want: a private gym, a sauna, a jacuzzi, even a nightclub. He entertained visitors, held court, and plotted his escape. Meanwhile, outside the prison walls, the world was changing. The government, emboldened by Escobar's capture, stepped up their war on drugs, seizing record amounts of cocaine, arresting key players in the cartels. Escobar watched the news reports, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a cold fury. He knew that he had to act, and act fast, if he was to reclaim his empire and secure his legacy. The plan was simple, but daring. Escobar would fake his own death, using a body double to throw the government off his trail. Then, while they were busy celebrating his demise, he would slip away, disappearing into the shadows, ready to strike when they least expected it. The day of the escape arrived, a stormy night in July, the air thick with the scent of rain and the hum of anticipation. Escobar, dressed in the clothes of a prison guard, watched as his men prepared the body double, a young man with a striking resemblance to him. They injected him with a lethal dose of drugs, then laid him out on a stretcher, a pool of blood spreading across the floor. As the clock ticked down to the appointed hour, Escobar felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. He had faced death many times before, stared it in the eye, and lived to tell the tale. This was no different. He was Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine, the most wanted man in the world. He would not go down without a fight. The moment of truth arrived. Escobar, his heart pounding in his chest, led the procession of guards and prisoners to the prison gates. The guards on duty, unaware of the ruse, stepped aside, allowing them to pass. As they did, Escobar felt a surge of adrenaline, a thrill of the chase, the same feeling he had felt all those years ago, when he had first started out, a young man with a dream and a gun. But as they reached the waiting van, the plan began to unravel. A guard, suspicious of the sudden activity, stepped forward, his hand reaching for his gun. Escobar, his eyes narrowing, reacted instinctively, drawing his own weapon and firing. The guard crumpled to the ground, a pool of blood spreading across the concrete. The shot echoed through the night, a signal flare announcing the start of the game. The prison came alive, guards and prisoners alike spilling out into the night, guns blazing, sirens wailing. Escobar, his heart pounding, knew that there was no turning back now. He was a wanted man, a fugitive, a criminal on the run. As he climbed into the back of the van, he took one last look at the prison, his fortress. Then, with a nod to his men, he slammed the door shut, and the van sped away, disappearing into the night, leaving behind a cloud of dust and a chorus of screams. The hunt was on, the game was afoot, and Pablo Escobar was once again the most wanted man in the world. But this time, he was not just fighting for his freedom, for his life. He was fighting for his legacy, for his empire, for his place in history. And he would stop at nothing to achieve it. As the van sped through the night, Escobar sat in the darkness, his mind racing, his heart pounding. He knew that the road ahead would be long and dangerous, filled with pitfalls and perils, enemies and allies. But he also knew that he was ready, that he had been born for this, that this was his destiny. And so, with a grim smile, Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine, disappeared into the night, his legend growing with each passing moment, his story far from over. The world was watching, waiting, wondering what would happen next. But for now, the king was gone, vanished into the shadows, his fate unknown, his legend immortal. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the final act was about to begin. The van careened through the night, its tires screeching against the asphalt, a symphony of chaos echoing in its wake. Escobar, his heart a drum in his chest, clung to the edge of his seat, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his mind racing. They were close, so close to freedom, but the noose was tightening, the neck closing in. He could feel it, like a cold breath on the back of his neck. Suddenly, the van swerved, its tires skidding on the wet road. Up ahead, a roadblock loomed, a wall of steel and blue lights, a barrier between them and freedom. Escobar's heart leapt into his throat. They were trapped, cornered like rats. He could see the officers now, their guns drawn, their faces hard, their eyes fixed on the van. This was it, the moment of truth, the pivotal point where fate would be decided. Escobar felt a surge of adrenaline, a rush of clarity. He was Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine, the most wanted man in the world. He would not go down without a fight. "Stop the van," he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. The driver, his face pale, his hands shaking, slammed on the brakes. The van skidded to a halt, its engine coughing, its tires smoking. Escobar, his eyes burning, his heart pounding, knew what he had to do. He threw open the back doors of the van, stepping out into the night, his gun in his hand, his eyes fixed on the officers. He could see the fear in their eyes, the hesitation, the doubt. He was Pablo Escobar, the most dangerous man in the world, and they knew it. "Drop your weapons," one of the officers shouted, his voice barely audible over the pounding of Escobar's heart. Escobar, his eyes narrowing, his finger tightening on the trigger, knew that he had to make a choice. He could fight, could die in a hail of gunfire, a martyr to his cause. Or he could surrender, could give himself up, could face justice, whatever that may be. In that moment, time seemed to slow, the world around him fading away, leaving only him and the officers, their guns pointed at him, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for his decision. Escobar, his heart pounding, his mind racing, knew what he had to do. He knew that this was not the end, not the final chapter of his story. He knew that he had to live, had to fight another day, had to continue his war. With a grim smile, he lowered his gun, his hands raised, his eyes never leaving the officers. "I surrender," he said, his voice steady, his tone resolute. "I surrender." The officers, their eyes wide, their guns still pointed at him, seemed to hesitate, to hold their breath. Then, one by one, they lowered their weapons, their faces a mix of relief and disbelief. Escobar, his heart still pounding, his mind still racing, knew that this was not the end, not the final chapter of his story. This was just the beginning of a new chapter, a new fight, a new war. As the officers approached him, their hands cuffing him, their voices barking orders, Escobar felt a sense of calm, of peace. He had made his choice, had chosen to live, to fight another day. He was Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine, the most wanted man in the world. And he was far from defeated. The days that followed were a blur, a whirlwind of chaos and confusion. Escobar was transferred from prison to prison, each one more secure than the last, each one a step further from freedom. He was interrogated, questioned, probed, his every move, his every word, his every breath scrutinized, analyzed, dissected. But Escobar was unbroken, unshaken, his spirit undeterred. He knew that this was just another challenge, another obstacle in his long and winding road. He knew that he would find a way, that he would escape, that he would rise again, like a phoenix from the ashes. And so, as the months passed, Escobar began to plan, to scheme, to plot. He used his connections, his influence, his power, to manipulate, to control, to bend the system to his will. He bribed guards, bought favors, made promises, all in the name of his freedom, all in the name of his empire. Finally, after months of planning, of waiting, of biding his time, the moment came. Escobar, his heart pounding, his mind racing, made his move. He escaped, not with a bang, but with a whisper, not with a fight, but with a smile. He walked out of the prison, a free man, his legend growing with each passing moment, his story far from over. The aftermath of Escobar's escape was swift and brutal. The Colombian government, humiliated and enraged, declared war on the drug cartels, launching a massive offensive against them, a campaign that would last for years, that would claim thousands of lives, that would change the very fabric of Colombian society. Escobar, meanwhile, went underground, disappearing into the shadows, becoming a ghost, a myth, a legend. He continued to run his empire, to control the drug trade, to amass his fortune, all from the safety of his hideouts, all from the shadows. But the government was not idle. They hunted him, pursued him, chased him, their determination unwavering, their resolve unbroken. They offered rewards, made deals, turned allies into enemies, all in the name of capturing him, of bringing him to justice. And so, the game of cat and mouse continued, a dance of death, a deadly ballet, a war that would span years, that would claim lives, that would change the course of history. But that is a story for another time, another chapter, another act in the long and winding road of Pablo Escobar's life. For now, let us leave Escobar in the shadows, a ghost, a myth, a legend, his fate unknown, his story far from over. Let us leave him with a question, a revelation, a moment that resonates emotionally. Let us leave him with a choice, a decision, a crossroads. Let us leave him with the question that haunts him, that follows him, that echoes through the darkness, the question that will shape his future, that will define his destiny. The question that asks, not if, but when. The question that asks, not how, but why. The question that asks, what is a man willing to do, to protect his empire, to protect his legacy, to protect his place in history? And with that question, with that revelation, with that moment, we leave Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine, the most wanted man in the world, to his fate, to his destiny, to his story. A story that is far from over, a story that will continue, a story that will echo through the ages, a story that will forever be remembered as the tale of Pablo Escobar, the king of cocaine.